Listen carefully, because the most dangerous part of the Haifa story is not what people argue about on camera. It's what nobody argues about at all. They argue about contracts, about trade, about cranes and container volumes, about whether one company is just doing business. But ports are not businesses in the normal sense. Ports are systems. And systems don't just move goods. Systems move options. Who can move? How fast? Under what conditions? And who can observe the flow? Here's the claim that sounds dramatic until you understand the math. When a foreign power operates a strategic maritime gateway, it doesn't need to fire a shot to gain leverage. It can map your rhythms. It can learn your constraints. It can identify what you can't afford to lose. And when a crisis hits, when your decision window shrinks from months to hours, those constraints stop being background noise. They become handles. This isn't a one-off controversy. It's the predictable output of a pattern that repeats across centuries whenever three things collide: debt-heavy capital, critical infrastructure, and geopolitical rivalry. And I'm going to anchor this with a number first, because if you don't lock the number, you won't feel why this accelerates now. As of the third quarter of 2025, global debt surged to nearly $346 trillion, around 310% of global GDP, according to the Institute of International Finance, as reported by Reuters. That single statistic tells you the world we're living in. Not a world of free markets, but a world of leveraged markets. Capital that must find assets, must lock in cash flows, must protect itself from volatility. And in that kind of world, the most valuable assets aren't the ones that look glamorous. They're the ones that look boring. Arteries, pipelines, payment rails, data exchanges, undersea cables, and yes, ports. Because ports are where trade becomes control. Now, if you stay with me until the end, I'm going to give you one simple test. One question you can use to spot these traps early anywhere in the world, before they become political emergencies. But first, you need the mechanism, a fixed pattern. 4 stages, simple enough to remember, brutal enough to explain history. Stage 1, a country wants modernization. It wants speed, efficiency, investment, lower costs, global competitiveness. Ports get congested, delays rise, the economy bleeds time and money. So leaders say, we need a new terminal, we need capacity, we need technology. Stage 2, the build-out is expensive, the timeline is tight, and only a handful of players can finance, build, and operate at scale. Deals get packaged as purely economic. Contracts get framed as routine. The logic is seductively clean. It's just infrastructure. Stage 3, the quiet capture. The operator gains persistent access to the ecosystem. Vendors, maintenance schedules, digital systems, cargo patterns, security procedures, patterns of life. Ports become sensors. Not because everyone is spying at all times, but because the system generates intelligence automatically. In the modern world, logistics is information. Stage 4, crisis. War, sanctions, diplomatic rupture, alliance friction, regional shock. Anything that compresses time. In that moment, the operator doesn't need to attack. The leverage comes from the configuration itself, dependency, uncertainty, and the fear that your artery is observable or influenceable. Your options narrow. Planning changes, allies react, markets price risk. That's the outcome, that's the machine. Now I'm going to prove it 3 times in history, so this doesn't feel like commentary. It feels like inevitability. First proof, the Suez Canal. When Suez was conceived and developed, it was framed as a modern miracle, an economic artery that would shorten routes and expand commerce. That's stage 1, modernization and revenue. Stage 2 appeared instantly. Massive infrastructure requires massive financing and technical capacity. The deeper the investment, the more external stakeholders become structurally involved. Over time, the canal stops being a project and starts being a hinge of empire-scale trade. Stage 3 is what most people forget. Once an artery is essential, it becomes a sensor and a leverage point even without overt coercion. Whoever has influence over operations, directly or indirectly, can shape the confidence of the system. Then stage 4 arrives when sovereignty collides with dependency. When the canal's status becomes contested, it's no longer just economics. It becomes a geopolitical trigger. The whole world suddenly remembers the canal is not merely a route, it's a switch. And here's the lesson. An artery doesn't have to be taken to be weaponized. It only has to be indispensable. Second proof, the Panama Canal. Again, stage 1, progress. A route that compresses geography and expands trade. Stage 2, the canal demands engineering, security, financing, and long-term management. That creates a vacuum only major powers can fill, because the system cannot tolerate failure. The world doesn't suggest stability for an artery. It demands it. Stage 3, the canal becomes leverage. A canal is not just a canal, it's a timetable, a pricing mechanism, a strategic planning tool. It shapes the trade map and therefore the power map. Stage 4, When political stability, sovereignty disputes, or external rivalries rise, the canal becomes an instrument, not because it's evil, but because it is necessary. It becomes one of the few points where pressure actually works. Third proof, Hambantota, the modern template that people argue about emotionally instead of mechanically. Stage 1, development. Sri Lanka wanted infrastructure that could turn geography into growth. Stage 2, large loans, large builds, large timelines. Big financing creates obligations. And in a debt-saturated world, obligations become bargaining leverage. Stage 3, repayment strain shifts the negotiating position. The creditor and operator gains more than interest. It gains influence over the asset's future, its terms, its surrounding ecosystem. Stage 4, long-term concession arrangements emerge because debt plus infrastructure is the perfect leverage engine. Debt is pressure, infrastructure is dependency. Combine them and you get strategic positioning that can be maintained without a single soldier. Now pause. 3 different contexts, different eras, different politics, same pattern. Because the pattern isn't cultural, it's structural. Now we apply it to Haifa, step by step, and you'll see why the debate itself is already behind the curve. Start with stage 1, modernization. Israel had a normal economic problem. Ports get congested, delays create costs. Costs ripple through imports, exports, supply chains. Modern ports are also technology systems, automation, scanning, scheduling, digital manifests. Israel moved toward expanding and modernizing capacity. The Bayport project at Haifa was presented as a major infrastructure upgrade to boost competition and reduce delays, with Reuters reporting the project's scale at 5 billion shekels, about $1, 7 billion, and describing it as enabling larger ships. That's the foundation. Efficiency logic, competitiveness logic, development logic, check. Now stage 2, overextension and the deal logic. Large infrastructure needs builders and operators with scale. And by the 2010s and 2020s, Chinese firms had become global giants in port construction and operation, able to finance, build fast, and operate massive terminals. In Haifa, Reuters reported that the Bayport would be operated by Shanghai International Port Group, SIPG, and that operations began around September 2021. And the long horizon matters. SIPG won a concession framework discussed as 25 years beginning from 2021 in widely cited reporting about the project. This is the pivot. This is where people keep thinking the story ends. It doesn't, because operator doesn't mean someone counting boxes. Operator means persistent access, verified. Now stage 3, the quiet capture. Modern terminals are information machines. They know shipping schedules. They map cargo flows. They see vendor networks. They integrate with digital logistics systems. And even if you assume every individual is acting neutrally, the system itself generates intelligence like heat from a fire. You don't have to try to learn patterns of life when you run the machine that produces patterns. And Haifa isn't just any port. It has been discussed in the context of U.S.-Israel naval cooperation and U.S. concerns about Chinese involvement. Public reporting and commentary over the years reflected this friction. For example, Israeli media reported U.S. Navy concerns that could affect docking decisions once the Chinese-operated terminal became active. Here's what matters about that. In geopolitics, concern is a force. It changes behavior. It changes planning. It changes alliance choreography. And when alliance choreography changes around a port, the port becomes more than infrastructure. It becomes a signal. Undeniable. Now stage 4, crisis. This is where the Haifa trap becomes real. Not as a spy movie, but as an options problem. A trap is not something that requires the opponent to spring it dramatically. A trap is a configuration where, under stress, your choice is narrow. Haifa sits inside multiple stress pathways at once. Pathway 1, great power rivalry. The U.S. has increased focus on strategic competition with China, and Reuters has described U.S. concern about China's expanding footprint across global ports as part of broader strategic anxiety around maritime infrastructure. So even if Haifa is quiet today, the global environment is not. Infrastructure that was once just commerce is now interpreted through rivalry. Pathway 2, regional escalation. Israel exists in a region where conflict can compress timelines overnight. In crisis, you care about secure throughput, fuel, specialized equipment, continuity of imports, economic stability that supports sustained operations. Pathway 3, alliance coordination. If an ally treats a port as sensitive due to foreign operation, it can alter port call decisions, logistics planning, and political messaging. Again, you don't need proof of wrongdoing to change posture. You only need the risk, and risk changes behavior, so the trap is not one dramatic event. The trap is that under pressure, decision makers must plan around uncertainty, and uncertainty is leverage. Now, let's lock it down like a checklist, because this is the part your audience will remember if you make it clean and punchy. A strategic gateway is modernized for economic reasons. Check. A foreign operator with deep state-linked context gains long-term operating role. Verified. The port becomes a data-rich system with persistent access. Undeniable. Strategic partners raise concerns that can alter operational compatibility and alliance behavior. Documented in public reporting. A debt-saturated world pushes capital into durable, strategic assets like ports. Confirmed by the macro reality, a crisis converts commercial arrangements into strategic constraints. This is history's repeatable rule. Check. Verified. Undeniable. Now, here's the part that increases retention because it turns the abstract into something your audience can picture. Imagine a crisis week, not a hypothetical someday, a real week where leaders are sleeping in suits and the news cycle is moving faster than diplomacy. In that week, planners ask questions that never appear on television. What systems touch the port's operations? What vendors maintain the cranes, gates, scanners, scheduling platforms? What data streams are produced automatically? If we needed to shift throughput to alternative routes quickly, can we? If an ally restricts port calls due to perceived risk, what changes downstream? And here's the most dangerous question of all. How much of our confidence relies on trust in a system we don't fully control? Because confidence is a weapon too. Markets move on confidence. Alliances move on confidence. Deterrence moves on confidence. A port can become a lever, not because it's physically blocked, but because the presence of uncertainty forces everyone to act more cautiously. That's option compression. That's modern leverage. And this is where people say, but Israel is strong, Israel is advanced, Israel has security, Israel will manage it. Listen carefully, because this is where the pattern humiliates pride. Every system says that. The British believed trade arteries were permanently manageable until choke points became political switches. The architects of canal systems believed stability could be secured indefinitely until sovereignty and rivalry forced renegotiation. Modern states believe digital systems make them safer until digital integration becomes a multiplier for dependency. So when someone says, technology will save us, what they're really saying is, we will outpace the pattern. But the pattern isn't slow because people are ignorant. It's slow because it's built on contracts, timelines, and dependency chains. And technology often accelerates it because it increases integration. More data, more automation, more points of leverage. Now let's answer the core question your viewers will have, but usually won't say out loud. What does control mean here? It doesn't mean a cartoon takeover. It means control as modern systems define it. Control of visibility. What you can observe shapes what you can predict. Control of friction. Small delays in an artery become big outcomes in a crisis. Control of optionality. If alternative routes are weaker, the main route becomes leverage. Control of timeline. Time stress forces decisions. Decisions under stress are easier to shape. If you can observe a system deeply, you can model it. If you can model it, you can anticipate it. If you can anticipate it, you can pressure it, often without ever making a threat. And time stress is the universal solvent of sovereignty. Now I promised you a test. Here it is. This is the practical takeaway you can give your audience so they leave smarter, not just alarmed. Stop analyzing geopolitics like it's a chain of headlines. Start analyzing it like it's a chain of dependencies. Ask these 3 questions, always. What is the artery? Who operates the artery? What happens to options under stress? If you run that test, you will spot leverage structures early, ports, rails, cables, payments, energy routes, before the argument becomes emotional and tribal. And now the final warning, stated clearly, because endings need to land like a hammer. This is not about whether China will do something dramatic at Haifa tomorrow. This is about the fact that the arrangement itself reshapes strategic geometry, Israel's planning, alliance calculations, and crisis posture, because it introduces persistent access and perceived risk into a system that must be trusted to function under pressure. The trap is the configuration, and configurations don't care about optimism. They care about math. So dismiss, this time is different. Dismiss the idea that modern markets are purely economic. Dismiss the fantasy that technology automatically removes vulnerability. In a debt-saturated world, the most powerful weapon is not always a missile. Sometimes it's an artery, and ports are arteries. If you want to understand what happens next, how these leverage systems expand, how they show up in other gateways, and how crisis converts commercial into strategic, subscribe and watch the next video. Because the next stage of the pattern is always the same. Once the artery becomes a pressure point, politics reorganizes around it, quietly at first, then suddenly. And when that moment arrives, you won't be asking, is this true? You'll be asking the only question that matters. When the crisis hits, who controls the options?